The exclusive gathering at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley was unlike any event the venue had hosted before. It was December 2023, and the library's board had organized what they called Visionaries Across Time, a unique fundraising dinner that brought together some of America's most influential innovators and leaders for an evening of discussion about the future of American entrepreneurship and space exploration. The guest list read like a who's who of tech titans, aerospace pioneers, and political leaders. But the evening's most anticipated moment was the scheduled conversation between Elon Musk, the entrepreneur behind Tesla, SpaceX, and numerous other ventures, and a very special guest who had agreed to participate via remarkable technological achievement that seemed to blur the lines between past and present. Through cutting-edge holographic technology and an extensive archive of Reagan's speeches, writings, and recorded conversations, the library had created an interactive experience that allowed visitors to engage with a remarkably lifelike representation of the former president. The technology, developed by a Silicon Valley startup, used artificial intelligence trained on thousands of hours of Reagan's public appearances, private recordings, and personal writings to create responses that captured not just his words, but his mannerisms, his storytelling style, and his fundamental worldview. Elon Musk sat at the head table, his characteristic intensity evident even in the relaxed atmosphere of the dinner. At 52, he had become one of the most polarizing figures in American business, revered by supporters as a visionary who was pushing humanity toward a sustainable future and eventual colonization of Mars, criticized by detractors as an impulsive entrepreneur whose ambitious promises often outpaced reality. The evening had already featured fascinating discussions about innovation, risk-taking, and the role of government in fostering technological advancement. But everyone in the room knew that the main event was the upcoming dialogue between Musk and the Reagan hologram, a conversation that would explore themes of leadership, vision, and the future of American space exploration. As the dinner plates were cleared and the lights dimmed, a shimmering figure appeared on the stage, Ronald Reagan, looking exactly as he had during his presidency, with that familiar smile and commanding presence that had defined his political career. "Good evening, everyone," the holographic Reagan said, his voice carrying the warmth and authority that had made him one of America's most effective communicators. "It's a pleasure to be here tonight, even in this rather unusual form." Laughter rippled through the audience as Musk approached the stage, extending his hand toward the hologram before catching himself and grinning sheepishly. "Mr. President," Musk said, his South African accent still faintly detectable despite decades in America, "this is certainly the most unique conversation I've ever had. Though I suppose if anyone would appreciate the technological achievement that makes this possible, it would be you. You always believed in pushing the boundaries of what was possible." Reagan's hologram nodded approvingly. "Indeed, Elon. May I call you Elon? Your work reminds me of something I've always believed, that America's greatest strength isn't our military or our economy, though both are important. It's our willingness to dream big dreams and then work tirelessly to make them reality." The audience settled in, captivated by the surreal spectacle of two visionaries from different eras engaged in conversation. "Mr. President," Musk began, "you were instrumental in revitalizing America's space program during your presidency. You championed the Strategic Defense Initiative, supported commercial space ventures, and always spoke about space as the next frontier. What advice would you give to someone trying to make humanity a multiplanetary species?" Reagan's expression grew more serious, more contemplative. "That's a remarkable goal, Elon, and one that I think captures the best of the American spirit. But let me share something with you that I learned during my years in office, something that might be relevant to your ambitious plans." The room fell completely silent. Even the waitstaff stopped moving, sensing that something significant was about to be said. "In 1986, Reagan continued, we faced the Challenger disaster. 7 brave Americans lost their lives because we had become too confident, too focused on schedules and political pressures, and not focused enough on the fundamental responsibility we have to the people who trust us with their lives. Musk's expression grew more attentive. He had faced his own share of setbacks and criticism, particularly after several high-profile SpaceX failures in the company's early years. The easy thing after Challenger would have been to scale back our ambitions, to play it safe, to let fear guide our decisions, Reagan said. But I learned something important in those dark days. True, leadership isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning from failure and using those lessons to build something stronger. Reagan paused, his holographic eyes seeming to focus directly on Musk. But here's the part that might surprise you, Elon. The most important lesson I learned from Challenger wasn't about technology or safety protocols, though those were crucial. It was about humility. Musk leaned forward slightly, his usual confidence tempered by genuine curiosity. You see, Reagan continued, I had surrounded myself with brilliant engineers, experienced administrators, and skilled politicians. But in our pursuit of bold goals, we had started to believe our own press releases. We had begun to think that our vision and determination could overcome any obstacle, that setbacks were just temporary inconveniences rather than warnings that needed to be heeded. The former president's voice took on a more personal tone. After Challenger, I spent many sleepless nights wondering whether my push for ambitious timelines and dramatic achievements had contributed to the tragedy. I had to confront the possibility that my leadership style, my emphasis on bold vision and unwavering optimism, might have created a culture where people were afraid to speak up about problems, afraid to slow down progress even when safety was at stake. The room was absolutely still. Many in the audience had expected a typical Reagan speech about American exceptionalism and the importance of reaching for the stars. Instead, they were witnessing something much more vulnerable and introspective. Elon, Reagan said, his voice growing warmer but maintaining its serious tone, you remind me of myself in many ways. You have an extraordinary vision for the future, tremendous determination, and the ability to inspire people to attempt things they never thought possible. But I want to share with you the most important advice I can offer. Never let your vision become more important than the people who are helping you achieve it. Musk was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing Reagan's words. When he spoke, his voice was more subdued than usual. Mr. President, I appreciate that advice. I've definitely made mistakes in how I've managed people, how I've communicated expectations. The pressure to achieve breakthrough technologies quickly can sometimes lead to challenging work environments. Reagan nodded understandingly. The challenge for visionary leaders is balancing urgency with wisdom, ambition with humility. You're trying to solve problems that could determine the future of human civilization, climate change, space exploration, sustainable transportation. The stakes couldn't be higher, and that can make patience feel like a luxury you can't afford. Exactly, Musk said, his characteristic intensity returning. When you see the potential for catastrophic climate change, when you understand that becoming a multiplanetary species might be essential for human survival, every delay feels like it could be costly for humanity's future. Reagan's expression grew thoughtful. I understand that sense of urgency, Elon. During the Cold War, I felt the weight of nuclear weapons, the possibility that human civilization could end in a matter of minutes. It's tempting to let that urgency justify any means necessary to achieve your goals. The holographic Reagan paused, then continued with obvious sincerity. But here's what I learned. Sustainable progress requires bringing people along with you, not just dragging them toward your vision. The most important innovations aren't just technological, they're social, cultural, organizational. You need to create systems and cultures that can continue making progress even when you're not personally driving every decision. Musk nodded slowly. That's something I've been thinking about more lately. How do you build organizations that can outlast their founders, that can continue pursuing ambitious goals without losing their innovative edge? Reagan smiled, that famous Reagan smile that had charmed voters and world leaders alike. Now that's the right question, Elon. And I think the answer lies in something that might seem counterintuitive for someone with your drive and vision. Learning to lead by serving others rather than demanding that others serve your vision. The audience exchanged glances. This was not the direction anyone had expected the conversation to take. What do you mean by that? Musk asked, genuinely curious. Reagan's hologram moved slightly, his posture becoming more conversational. Throughout my career in Hollywood, as governor of California, as president, I learned that the most effective leaders aren't the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones who create environments where other people can contribute their best ideas, where innovation comes from collaboration rather than top-down directives. He paused, studying Musk's expression. You've already proven that you can achieve remarkable things through force of will and personal brilliance. But imagine what you could accomplish if you could multiply that capability through other people. If you could create organizations where thousands of brilliant minds felt empowered to contribute their best work toward your shared goals. Musk was quiet for a moment, then asked, "But how do you maintain standards? How do you ensure that people are pushing themselves to achieve truly breakthrough innovations?" Sometimes being demanding, being willing to ask for the impossible, is what drives real progress. Reagan nodded approvingly. That's a fair question, and you're right that high standards are essential. But there's a difference between demanding excellence and creating fear, between challenging people to exceed their own expectations and making them afraid to fail. The former president's voice took on a more storytelling quality. Let me share something with you. Some of my most important achievements as president came not from my own ideas, but from creating space for other people to propose solutions I never would have thought of. The INF Treaty with the Soviet Union, for example, emerged from allowing diplomats and military advisors to explore approaches that initially seemed impossible. Reagan's expression grew more animated as he warmed to his theme. The key was creating an environment where people felt safe to propose bold ideas, where failure was seen as a learning opportunity rather than a career-ending mistake. When people aren't afraid of being humiliated or fired for taking risks, they're much more likely to contribute breakthrough thinking. Musk leaned back in his chair, clearly reflecting on Reagan's words. That's interesting. I've always believed that if you're not pushing people to their limits, you're not achieving your potential as an organization. And you're not wrong about that, Reagan replied. But there's a difference between pushing people to their limits and pushing them beyond their limits. The first creates growth and innovation. The second creates burnout and resentment. The holographic Reagan paused, then continued with a more personal tone. Elon, you're attempting something that no individual has ever attempted before, fundamentally transforming multiple industries simultaneously while also pursuing space exploration and artificial intelligence. The scope of your ambitions is extraordinary, and it requires a different kind of leadership than what got you to this point. Musk raised an eyebrow. What kind of leadership? Leadership that multiplies rather than consumes, Reagan said simply. Leadership that creates other leaders rather than demanding followers. Leadership that builds institutions and cultures that can continue making progress even when you're not personally involved in every decision. The room was captivated by the exchange. Many audience members had expected a cheerleading session about American innovation and entrepreneurship. Instead, they were witnessing a profound conversation about the evolution of leadership and the challenges facing visionary entrepreneurs. Mr. President, Musk said, I have to admit, this isn't the advice I expected from you. You're known for your optimism, your belief in American exceptionalism, your confidence in bold action. Reagan laughed, that warm, genuine laugh that had endeared him to millions of Americans. "Oh, I still believe in all of those things, Elon. But I've learned that true optimism isn't about believing that everything will work out perfectly. It's about believing that we can learn from our mistakes and build something better. Real confidence isn't about never doubting yourself. It's about being secure enough to listen to other people's ideas and admit when you don't have all the answers." The former president's expression grew more serious. And American exceptionalism isn't about being better than everyone else. It's about creating systems and cultures that bring out the best in people, that allow ordinary individuals to achieve extraordinary things. Musk was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing Reagan's perspective. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, less performative, more thoughtful. "Mr. President, can I ask you about something specific? You dealt with massive bureaucracies, entrenched interests, people who were resistant to change. How did you navigate that while still pursuing transformative goals?" Reagan's hologram smiled approvingly. "Now that's a question that gets to the heart of effective leadership. The answer is that you don't fight the bureaucracy, you transform it from within." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "When I became president, I could have tried to simply override the existing systems, to impose my vision through executive orders and political pressure. And sometimes that was necessary. But the most lasting changes came from convincing people throughout the government that our goals aligned with their own deeper motivations." Reagan's voice took on a more instructional tone. "Most people, whether they're government employees or engineers at SpaceX, want to feel like their work matters, like they're contributing to something meaningful. The key is helping them see how your vision connects to their own sense of purpose." Musk nodded slowly. "That makes sense in theory, but how do you do that practically? How do you change cultures and mindsets when you're dealing with thousands of people?" "You start by changing yourself," Reagan said simply. "You model the kind of behavior and thinking you want to see throughout your organization. You show people that you value their input, that you're willing to admit mistakes, that you see them as partners in achieving shared goals rather than instruments for implementing your personal vision." The holographic Reagan moved closer to Musk, his expression becoming more intense. "But here's the most important part, Elon. You have to mean it. People can sense whether you genuinely respect them or whether you're just using better management techniques to manipulate them. Authentic leadership requires genuine care for the people you're leading." Musk sat in silence for several moments, clearly wrestling with Reagan's advice. The audience waited, sensing that something significant was happening. "Mr. President," Musk said finally, "I have to be honest with you. Part of me worries that if I become too collaborative, too focused on consensus building, we'll lose the urgency and drive that has allowed us to achieve breakthrough innovations. Sometimes being demanding, being willing to push through resistance, is what makes the impossible possible." Reagan nodded understandingly. "That's a legitimate concern, Elon, and it shows that you're taking this conversation seriously. Let me ask you something. Do you think the most important innovations in your companies have come from your individual brilliance, or from your ability to inspire and coordinate the brilliance of others?" Musk considered the question carefully. "Honestly, both. Some breakthrough insights have come from my own thinking, but the implementation, the refinement, the scaling, that's definitely been a team effort." "Exactly," Reagan said with satisfaction. "And as your goals become more ambitious, landing humans on Mars, solving climate change, developing artificial general intelligence, the ratio is going to shift more and more toward collective intelligence. No individual, no matter how brilliant, can master all the domains necessary for those achievements." Reagan's hologram paused, then continued with obvious sincerity. "The question isn't whether you should abandon your drive and vision. Those qualities are essential. The question is how you can multiply that drive and vision through other people. How you can create organizations that are more than the sum of their parts. Musk leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. How do you do that without losing accountability, without letting standards slip? Reagan smiled. By holding yourself to higher standards than you hold anyone else. By being the first to admit mistakes and the first to give credit for successes. By showing people that excellence isn't about avoiding failure, it's about learning faster and adapting more quickly than your competitors. The former president's voice grew more passionate. Elon, you have an opportunity that few leaders in history have had. You're building organizations and technologies that could literally determine the future of human civilization. But that opportunity comes with a responsibility, not just to achieve your goals, but to achieve them in ways that make humanity stronger, more capable, more united. The room was completely silent, everyone absorbed in Reagan's words. The technologies. You're developing sustainable transportation, space exploration, artificial intelligence. They're going to reshape society whether you succeed or fail. The question is whether they'll reshape it in ways that bring out the best in human nature or the worst. Reagan's hologram looked directly at Musk. If you build organizations based on fear, competition, and individual brilliance, you'll create technologies that reflect those values. If you build organizations based on collaboration, mutual respect, and shared purpose, you'll create technologies that make humanity more collaborative, more respectful, more unified. Musk was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with the implications of Reagan's argument. When he spoke, his voice was more subdued than it had been all evening. Mr. President, I appreciate what you're saying, and I think there's wisdom in it. But I also worry about the time frame. Climate change, the risk of civilization-ending events, the potential for other countries or organizations to develop dangerous AI. These problems feel urgent in ways that might not allow for the kind of gradual cultural change you're describing. Reagan's expression grew more sympathetic. I understand that urgency, Elon. I felt similar pressure during the Cold War, when the wrong decision could have led to nuclear war. But here's what I learned. The fastest way to solve urgent problems is often to slow down and build sustainable solutions rather than quick fixes. He paused, then continued with obvious conviction. The Soviet Union fell not because we defeated them militarily, but because we built systems and alliances that were stronger, more resilient, more attractive than theirs. It took longer than imposing our will through force would have taken, but it created lasting change that didn't require constant maintenance. Reagan's hologram moved slightly, his posture becoming more assertive. Your goals making life multiplanetary. Solving climate change, developing beneficial AI, these aren't sprint goals. Elon, they're marathon goals that will require sustained effort over decades. The organizations and cultures you build now will determine whether humanity can maintain that effort long enough to succeed. The audience was captivated by the exchange, witnessing a conversation that none of them had expected, a former president challenging one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs to fundamentally reconsider his approach to leadership and innovation. Musk sat in contemplation for nearly a full minute before responding. Mr. President, what you're describing sounds like it requires a level of patience and long-term thinking that feels almost impossible given the urgency of the problems we're facing. How do you maintain that perspective when every day of delay could be costly? Reagan's smile returned, warmer and more understanding. By remembering that the goal isn't just to solve problems, Elon, it's to solve them in ways that make humanity more capable of solving future problems. Every organization you build, every technology you develop, every interaction you have with the people around you is either making humanity stronger or weaker. The former president paused, his expression growing more personal. When I was your age, I thought leadership was about having a clear vision and the determination to achieve it regardless of obstacles. As I got older, I learned that real leadership is about developing other people's capacity for vision and determination, about creating systems that can continue making progress even when the original leader is no longer involved. Reagan's hologram looked out over the audience, then back to Musk. You're not just building companies. Elon, you're building examples of what human organizations can accomplish when they operate at their highest potential. The way you treat people, the cultures you create, the values you embody, those will influence how other organizations approach similar challenges. Musk nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I think I understand what you're saying. You're arguing that the means become part of the ends, that how we achieve our goals shapes what those achievements ultimately mean for humanity. Exactly, Reagan said with obvious satisfaction. And that's why this conversation matters so much. The technologies you're developing will either amplify humanity's best qualities or its worst ones, depending on how they're created and deployed. The holographic Reagan moved closer to Musk, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. Elon, you have an opportunity that few people in history have had, to shape not just what humanity builds, but how humanity builds. The leadership approaches you pioneer, the organizational cultures you create, the ways you solve problems, those will become templates that other leaders and organizations follow. Reagan paused, then delivered what would become the most quoted line from the evening. The question isn't just whether you can get humans to Mars, Elon, it's whether the humans who get to Mars will be better versions of ourselves than the ones we are today. The room erupted in applause, but Musk remained focused on Reagan, clearly still processing the conversation. Mr. President, Musk said as the applause died down, this has been one of the most challenging conversations I've had in years. You've given me a lot to think about, not just about leadership and organization building, but about responsibility and legacy. Reagan's expression softened. That was my intention, Elon. Not to discourage your ambitions or slow your progress, but to help you think about how to achieve your goals in ways that create the most positive impact for humanity. As the formal conversation concluded and the evening moved toward its close, many audience members approached both Musk and the Reagan hologram with their own questions and comments. But the real impact of the evening would be felt in the weeks and months that followed, as Musk began implementing changes in his leadership style and organizational approaches that reflected his conversation with Reagan. The advice that had stunned the room wasn't about technology or strategy, it was about the fundamental responsibility that visionary leaders have to develop other leaders, to create organizations that bring out the best in human nature, and to pursue ambitious goals in ways that make humanity stronger, rather than just more capable. In the months that followed, observers noted subtle but significant changes in Musk's public communications and management style. He began speaking more about collaboration and team achievements, less about individual brilliance and force of will. He implemented new organizational practices focused on employee development and psychological safety. Most importantly, he began framing his company's missions not just in terms of technological achievement, but in terms of human development and social progress. The conversation between Musk and Reagan's hologram became a case study in leadership development programs and business schools around the world. But for those who were present that evening, it remained something more personal, a reminder that true leadership isn't about imposing your vision on the world, but about helping others develop their own capacity for vision, innovation, and positive impact. Reagan's final words that evening would be remembered long after the technology that made the conversation possible became obsolete. The measure of a leader isn't what they accomplish in their lifetime, Elon, it's what becomes possible because they lived.